If you think that traveling to the United States is still appealing to millions of tourists, especially our neighbor Canada, think again. I will not go to the United States while Donald Trump is in power. I can tell you, 30 to 50% of the tours that my company gives are for Canadian high school groups. We're gonna feel a big impact in our pocket at the end of the season if they're going to show up this year. In less than a year, more than 5 million Canadians, once the most loyal visitors to the United States, have chosen not to return. The places that once welcomed them with smiles and morning coffee now only have empty chairs and closed doors. Some tourist towns, where 50% of revenue depends on their northern neighbor, are on the brink of bankruptcy. Even the areas once called winter paradises are now as desolate as if the pandemic had never ended. And the scariest thing? Many of us don't realize it until it's too late. In this video, let's explore the 10 states in the United States that are at risk of collapse due to a silent travel boycott from Canada, our oldest friend. Stay tuned because there are some states you wouldn't expect to see on this list. Now, let's start with the first. Do you think California's big enough to withstand any challenge? So think about this. One of the highest spending groups of tourists has quietly disappeared, leaving behind brightly lit streets that no one walks into. At its peak, nearly 1 million Canadians flock to California each year. From Vancouver, Toronto, to as far as Quebec, they come for the Napa Valley wines, the golden sandy beaches, and the Hollywood dreams. But by 2025, hotels in San Francisco and San Diego reported a 20 to 30% decrease in bookings compared to the same period last year. Hollywood tours had to cut trips. The souvenir shop on Venice Beach closes earlier every evening. It's not just the rising cost of living or expensive plane tickets. Canadians are feeling unwelcome. From controversial immigration policies, the US-Canada trade conflict, to cultural tensions, they feel that things are no longer the same. Moreover, the exchange rate change has weakened the Canadian dollar, making trips less worth it. Why should I pay 30% more for the same dinner when I could be served more friendly in Portugal? That's how many Canadians explain their change. For those working in the service industry in California, the lack of Canadian tourists has become a cause for concern. The owner of a small bakery in Santa Monica shared, every March, I would receive cake orders from a Canadian family. They live here for 3 weeks each year, but this year no one has come back. Sales have also been declining. Her shop used to be a meeting point for tourists, but now only a few locals pass by, and she is starting to consider closing it down permanently. California may be a symbol of the American dream, but even a symbol can fade when it loses those small yet important pieces. When trust between the two sides of the border shows signs of fading, the loss is not just monetary, but it could also be the breaking of a relationship once built on smiles, hospitality, and warm winter trips. If California wants to keep its glorious tourist seasons, perhaps it's time to look beyond the financial balance sheet. Rebuilding trust and reconnecting with those who once considered it their second winter home is not just an economic strategy, but a cultural responsibility. California is still beautiful, but if no one comes to admire it anymore, does that beauty still hold meaning? If you still think Texas can only survive on oil, cattle, and BBQ, think again. In reality, there is a stream of tourists quietly sustaining thousands of businesses, until they withdraw without a word of warning. It is estimated that in just 2024, more than 1 million Canadians visited Texas. Not only the major cities like Houston, Austin, and Dallas, but also the small towns along the border. But by 2025, the number of Canadian tourists had significantly decreased, leading to RV parks being largely empty, restaurants in San Antonio shortening their hours, and rental car companies reporting inventory levels exceeding expectations. In places that were once bustling with Canadians escaping the winter, parking lots are empty, gas stations are quiet, and hotels have stopped hiring seasonal staff. And the reason lies not only in the economy, but also in the changing perceptions and trust. Many people believe that Texas has recently been viewed by some international visitors as leaning toward more conservative values, which may not always align with their personal comfort or expectations. Additionally, domestic inflation and uncertainty in diplomatic relations have made them consider each trip more carefully. A Canadian family who used to camp every year in hill country shared, "We still love Texas and the people here. It's just that now it doesn't feel like it belongs to us anymore." As for the people of Texas, that absence is not just a loss of money, but a loss of connection. Losing the people who once saw Texas as a winter refuge, a second home. A limousine driver in Austin for 22 years remembers each of the regular Canadian customers, those who always tipped generously and took photos together before leaving. He shared, "Every February I usually have a full schedule shuttling guests from the airport to the festivals in Texas. This year, I received fewer than 10 rides from Canada. My wife had to quit her part-time job because our income dropped. Everything is changing too fast." Texas has long been a symbol of freedom, openness, and hospitality, but now it cannot avoid a wave of turning away from even the most familiar tourists. And when a state begins to forget who nurtures its local tourism ecosystem, sooner or later that ecosystem will wither like the desert Texas is famous for. To save the towns that are losing visitors, the unemployed drivers, and the restaurants on the verge of closing, Texas needs more than just tourism advertising. We need to listen, need a sincere greeting, and we need an attitude open enough to say, "We still value you just like before." Because if we don't soon embrace what we've lost, and if those familiar faces don't return, Texas may find its warm winters a little lonelier than before. Las Vegas never sleeps, but when Canadian tourists stopped coming, the whole city began to lose sleep over revenue, over jobs, and over a worry that had never existed before. In 2024, more than 1.7 million Canadians visited Nevada, most flocking to Las Vegas, Reno resorts, and casinos. They are not just tourists, they are familiar faces, familiar with the rooms, familiar with the front desk staff, a group of guests who stay long, spend a lot, and return many times. But by 2025, everything changed. The hotels along the Strip reduced their capacity from 90% to only 50% during peak season. Flights from Canada have been reduced or completely cancelled. Meanwhile, restaurants, casinos, and convention centers are all reporting losses. Many places have to offer unprecedented weekday deals to fill the gaps. What has caused a top-ranking tourist state to become so troubled? If you've ever interacted and chatted with Canadians, you might sense that they see Las Vegas as a second playground. But after recent changes, they are starting to feel that it no longer aligns with their values, culture, and even their sense of personal safety. Additionally, with rising airfare, increased dining costs, and a sense of disrespect in foreign policy, they are starting to choose Europe, Mexico, or staying home. A longtime visitor from Calgary shared, "Las Vegas now feels like a party we are no longer invited to." As for the drivers, casino staff, and tour guides, they are the backbone of the tourism industry. And when the most stable stream of customers disappears, the tremors begin with them. A waitress at an old buffet restaurant on the Las Vegas Strip expressed, "Every spring, I always have familiar Canadian guests. They are always cheerful, chatty, and tip very generously. This year I realized none of them showed up anymore. My shift was cut, income has halved, and I started to worry about the future of the whole family." Nevada used to be a place where people forgot about time. But now, time is clearly reminding us that no one is invincible. A city that thrives on tourism cannot survive if it loses its regular visitors and long-standing relationships, even if it's just for a few weeks each year. Nevada cannot compete with lights forever. What remains to attract visitors is sincerity, safety, and a sense of respect. It's time for Las Vegas and all of Nevada to understand that rebuilding trust with those who once loved you is not a strategy, but a matter of survival. Because when the lights are still on but no one is admiring them anymore, that's what is truly concerning. When people think of New York, they often think of the hustle and bustle of Manhattan. But did you know there are towns in northern New York that relied on every car with an Ontario license plate? And now, they no longer roll through. In 2024, Canada accounted for the highest proportion of international visitors to New York, especially in the upstate region, from Niagara Falls and Lake George to the small towns along the lakes. But just after 1 year, revenue from Canadian tourists dropped by 30 to 50% in many areas. The inn has been fully booked throughout the spring, the lakeside restaurants close early on weekends, and the duty-free shop is deserted. Instead of the line of cars at the Buffalo or Alexandria Bay border crossings, the parking lot now has more birds than people. For Canadians, New York used to be the ideal weekend getaway, close, familiar, and cheap. But now they see prices rising every day, border policies are no longer friendly, and the sentiment no longer feels welcoming, leading them to decide to stay home or go elsewhere. What's more, the suburbs and upper regions, which rely on cross-border traffic, are the ones feeling the impact the most. A resident from Montreal shared, "We don't go anymore because we feel like no one needs us. We used to bring money, joy, and connection." For New York residents, the drivers from Quebec or Ottawa are not just visitors. They are a vibrant part of the memories of glorious summers. And now, that void is colder than winter here. A boat rental shop owner at Lake George, once crowded with Canadian tourists every weekend, reminisces, Last year, I had to add a dozen more boats because of the overload. This year I sat from morning till evening without anyone calling. My son said I should sell some, but I couldn't bring myself to do it because I still hope they will come back. New York City still shines with lights and welcomes millions of tourists, but the rest of the state, the rural areas, the borders, is quietly struggling with disappearance. A state cannot survive on cities alone, and a community cannot stand strong if forgotten. New York needs to listen to the voices from the outskirts of the city. We need to take action, not just to promote tourism, but to rebuild the emotional bridge between both sides of the border. Because if we lose those who once considered us close neighbors, then what is called the New York dream will only remain an old postcard in the drawer of memories. In Arizona, people often joke that winter only exists on the calendar. But perhaps this winter is different. Absent are the people who once made this place warm, lively, and full of life. Arizona used to be a winter paradise for tens of thousands of Canadians, especially retirees seeking sunshine to escape the northern chill. They bought houses, rented RVs, played golf every morning, and brought life to small towns like Yuma, Mesa, and Tucson. But by 2025, this is gradually disappearing. RV parks that used to require reservations a year in advance are now completely empty. The Canadian RV community is experiencing the highest vacancy rates in a decade. Many golf courses report a drop in play of up to 40%. Even the local supermarket has reduced imports of familiar items for Canadians, from tea to domestically branded cookies that used to sell well every winter. Canadians never stopped loving the sun. Arizona, and the reason why you might have guessed it by now, the post-pandemic anxiety, along with the increasing politicization of health issues and personal freedoms. Along with that, the debates surrounding the rights of immigrants, etc., are gradually making Arizona a place where older Canadian tourists feel alienated. Additionally, the rising cost of travel health insurance, along with the weak Canadian dollar, has made warm winters a luxury. A retired couple in British Columbia confided, "I used to call Arizona home every winter. Now I'm not sure if I'm still welcome there." On this side, many people in Arizona are also feeling disappointed. The owner of a small cafe in Tucson, which used to open at 5 a.m. to welcome Canadian snowbirds who came to play golf, shared they would arrive early, cheerful, order a lot, and always leave a thank you. I remember their voices, gentle, warm. This year, only the sun, but my heart is colder than ever. Arizona can keep the sunshine, but it can't keep the hearts of tourists if they feel pushed away. The towns that once thrived thanks to the influx of winter visitors now resemble a rerun of a movie, beautiful but lacking an audience. And perhaps when a community once built on returnees is suddenly forgotten, it is a clear warning sign that we have lost something deeper than money. Arizona needs to remember that warm winters come not just from the climate, but also from how we welcome others. Keep the smile, open the door again, and show our northern neighbors that they are still appreciated. This is not just a tourism strategy but a way to restore a part of the state's soul. Just a few hours drive from Vancouver and you'll reach Seattle. But now the border that once seemed like just a line has become an invisible wall, causing millions of Canadians to no longer return. Washington used to be the #1 destination for Canadians traveling to the US by road, especially from British Columbia. In 2024, over 3 million Canadian visitors crossed through border checkpoints like Peace Arch, Somers, and Blaine to shop, vacation, camp, and enjoy coffee along the Seattle waterfront. But by 2025, the malls in Bellingham were deserted gas stations near the border, no longer had lines, the outlet in Tulip cut 30% of its peak season staff, and farmers markets in roadside towns reported losses due to unsold inventory. A local supermarket owner said, "We stock up on goods but no one comes to buy them anymore." It's that simple. Washington used to be considered the backyard of Vancouver residents, a place they would cross over to for gas, shopping, and weekend enjoyment. But now what Canadians are seeing is probably just the unfavorable exchange rate making a tank of gas in the US 25 to 30% more expensive, and the post-COVID border control policies still being unfriendly, causing unnecessary hassle. Washington has long been regarded as the bridge state, not just geographically but also in terms of human connections. But when the bridge of trust breaks, the consequences do not lie in the big cities, but in the border towns where each car from Canada used to be a breath of economic life. Washington doesn't need a grand promotional campaign to save the situation. Sometimes all it takes is to speak up, to say, "We miss you." That's the way to reconnect each broken bridge. That's how bakeries, gas stations, and coffee shops come back to life, not just by revenue but by hope. Because if Washington is no longer the friendly neighbor, then what will remain after the pine forests and the deserted mountain roads? Canadians used to call the trip to Michigan a familiar trip. Just cross the Ambassador Bridge, shop, have lunch, and return before sunset. But this year, millions of Canadians have disappeared from Michigan, and that absence is leaving a crack in the heart of the state's economy. In 2024, millions of Canadian visitors, primarily from Ontario, crossed the border into Michigan. They went shopping in Detroit, vacationed on Mackinac Island, fished in Traverse City, or simply stopped by Port Huron and Sault Ste. Marie to refuel and have dinner. But in 2025, the ferry from Canada to the US was so empty that they had to cut trips. Motels along the border route saw a 20 to 30% drop in revenue. Duty-free shops, gas stations, and restaurants in the border town are reporting their lowest revenues in 10 years. Some towns have had to cut summer staff, close early, and even consider canceling the festival events that used to be held for Canadian tourists. The bond between Ontario and Michigan was once as strong as the surface of the lake connecting the two shores. But now, that connection is showing signs of fading quietly. Part of the reason is the unfavorable exchange rate, which makes shopping in the US expensive. Along with that, customs policies and border controls are becoming increasingly cumbersome, turning what used to be simple trips into a hassle. It's time for Michigan to reconsider what small towns are losing. Not just money, but relationships. A sincere invitation, a campaign to reconnect with Canadians, and more humane border policies could help restore not just the economy, but also the memories of once bustling summers. Because if the bridges still stand, but people no longer want to cross them, are we truly connecting or just standing on opposite sides looking at each other? Maine is just a coastal state that thrives on beloved summers by those who consider it a second home. And when a town thrives on return visits and no one is returning anymore, it's not just a loss of money, but a loss of part of its identity. But in the 2025 tourist season, campsites were empty during the peak season, something that hadn't happened in 20 years. Maine Bay cruise tours reported losses due to not having enough passengers to set sail. Seafood shops, ice cream parlors, and coastal inns had to close earlier than expected. Even many tourist areas are not hiring seasonal staff anymore because Canadian visitors are no longer coming, and there's no need to expand. Maine doesn't have flashy casinos or gigantic amusement parks. What this state sells is an experience, rustic, peaceful, close to nature. And Canadians used to cherish that more than anyone else. But by 2025, border barriers had not yet been completely removed. Travel costs had skyrocketed and concerns about friendliness in the US after political upheavals, all of which kept them at home or heading elsewhere. Maine is just a coastal state that thrives on beloved summers by those who consider it a second home. And when a town thrives on return visits and no one is returning anymore, it's not just a loss of money, but a loss of part of its identity. Perhaps Maine doesn't need to promote its beauty any further because everyone already knows it's beautiful. But one thing needs to be reiterated. Canadians used to feel welcomed here, and that's what makes them come back year after year. A sincere invitation, a We Miss You campaign sent to Quebec or New Brunswick, could help rekindle the lighthouses shining into the void. Because if tourists no longer return, then the beauty of Maine, no matter how peaceful, is just the sound of waves lapping in solitude. South Carolina, especially Myrtle Beach, used to welcome hundreds of thousands of Canadians each year. Not just tourists, but also snowbirds, retirees who winter there. However, in 2025, the cancellation rate increased by 40% during the winter, which is the peak season for Canadian tourists. The resorts and vacation apartments have extended vacancies, forcing them to significantly reduce prices, even offering the first month for free. Many seaside restaurants report operating at only 50% capacity, cutting back on staff and closing earlier than in previous years. The golf courses, once fully booked, now extend their hours without any players. South Carolina used to be a symbol of Southern hospitality, attracting Canadians with its warm weather, affordable cost of living, and pleasant culture. However, since the implementation of policies that restrict personal rights and control immigration, communities that were once open like Canada have begun to feel disconnected. At the same time, the rising costs of car rentals, airfare, and health insurance have turned a warm vacation into a financial challenge for many travelers. If South Carolina wants to reclaim its glorious winters, perhaps it needs something simple: to step out of its own shadow. A campaign to connect, a friendly invitation, and a return to openness are essential to bring them back. Because if the most beautiful beaches in America no longer have anyone strolling along them, could it be that we are the ones who have changed? Did you know Florida used to welcome over 3.5 million Canadian visitors each year? A number so high that in some neighborhoods you would hear more French and English than American. But now, even the busiest streets are starting to hear silence. In the winter of 2024 to 2025, the number of Canadian tourists decreased by more than 40%, leaving thousands of vacation apartments vacant. Many resorts had to offer extra months to retain guests. The Canada-friendly restaurants in Fort Myers had to close completely. The coastal mobile home community, once filled with Canadians, is now desolate with wild grass growing. Florida used to be a place where Canadians sought freedom, safety, and comfort, but, everything is changing. Rising costs of healthcare, insurance, housing, and services, along with security issues, make Florida more concerning than appealing. Additionally, climate change, with storms and extreme weather events, has led many Canadians to choose Mexico, Portugal, or simply stay in their home country. Florida used to be a place that didn't need advertising because guests returned as a part of life. But now, Florida itself is at risk of losing its most precious asset, its connections. Florida doesn't lack sunshine, but it is lacking the deep connections that once sustained thousands of small businesses, winter resident communities, and the memories of both nations. Florida needs more than just sunshine and blue seas. It needs kindness to be reborn. A We Remember You campaign sent to the Canadian community and a policy effort to ease tensions. These are the first steps toward healing. Because if a place once called paradise no longer has room for those who once loved it, then perhaps that very paradise is disappearing. From California to Florida, from Maine to Arizona, more than 10 states have been witnessing the quiet disappearance of millions of Canadians, those who once considered America their winter home. They left quietly, and that very silence is causing small towns to turn off their lights early, shops to close hastily, and people to lose their livelihoods. This is not just a risk of a tourism crisis, but it is also the risk of losing connection between people, between two countries that were once as close as neighbors, who understood each other with just a glance and a smile. Are you living in one of these states? Do you feel the change? Please leave a comment if you've noticed that winters are no longer the same. And don't forget to subscribe so we can continue telling the stories the media has overlooked but are truly changing America, one street corner at a time. The content in this video is based on publicly available information sources, travel reports, statistical data, and contributions from local residents. All analyses and comments are exploratory and social commentary in nature, not intended to offend or belittle any country, community, or individual. The goal of the video is to create an open, honest, and emotionally rich dialogue about the changes quietly happening in the daily lives of the American people. Thank you for staying until the end.